Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, Tobago's media, and the national media, national community following us here in Tobago. Thank you very much for joining us here at Magdalena Grand on a day that I am pleased to announce is the day the Lord has made. And that we're very pleased. I came here to Tobago in my capacity as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago to meet with the people in Tobago who are in the political arena with a responsibility for the administration of the business of Tobago through an executive council and the Tobago House of Assembly. I just want, as by way of background, to say to you that I'm also the political leader of a political party, the People's National Movement. And that party has in Tobago an autonomous body, or I may say semi-autonomous, because the Tobago the Tobago Island Council has complete autonomy within Tobago for the PNM's business in Tobago. And I dare say in practice that autonomy is highly respected. Recently there was a Tobago House of Assembly election. That autonomy reflected itself in the Assembly having to report on its duties carried out in the period. The selection of candidates and the carrying of the campaign was pretty much a Tobago issue. And we also have in Tobago an executive council which carries out the day-to-day and other kinds of administrations in Tobago. And for the election, we were all in receipt of the results. I have not heard one person complain that the election was not conducted fairly and properly. The results turned up a 6-6 in a 12-seat House of Assembly. And that 6-6 showed that the PNM had lost some considerable ground and the PDP had gained some ground, but the bottom line is that at the winning poll, it was a dead heat. On the next day, as Prime Minister of the country and as leader of a political party involved in the elections, I did say to the media then that it is for the Tobagonians to try and formulate whatever they could and to deal with this matter in any way they could to see whether it was possible for them, without any outside interference or involvement, to come to a position which would allow them to go forward beyond that point of the deadlock. I also said that I would wait to see what the outcome is, and given what I know of the law and seeing the outcome of the election, I knew that there would have been legal ramifications. And therefore I said that I have immediately sought senior counsel advice as to what is meant by the outcome and what is likely to happen and what role the central government, which I lead, may be called upon to play. And it was also said by me then that if it is that it turns out that the Tobagonians are not able to come to a position to cause an assembly to be properly constituted, and there's a requirement for the cabinet and the parliament to be involved, the government would be on standby to do what has to be done to assist in relieving whatever difficulty might have arisen in Tobago. Those were my position as leader of the government, and one can go as far as to say leader of a political party whose Island Council, Autonomous Island Council, was involved in the campaign and resulted in holding 6 of those 12 seats. I have seen it said and heard it said by some of the pontiffs that I should have come to Tobago before, and today was even a pappy show, and it has been interpreted that, well, the Prime Minister will intervene to save his colleagues in Tobago, and so on and so on. All those are reasonable positions. But the bottom line is this: I guarantee you that had I stuck myself into these processes from the 26th of January or soon after, while the elected members who were sworn in were meeting or having to meet to conclude or to progress their situation. Had I, as Prime Minister, also carrying the other hat of leader of the PNM at the national level, if I had come in here before, the same people who are today saying that these discussions or this contact or these conversations should have taken place before would have been saying the Prime Minister is out of place to not let the Tobago people handle their affairs and that there's no role for the Prime Minister in that matter. It's a matter for the Tobagonians because the THA Act says that it is the 12 Assemblymen and he's not a member of the Assembly. And I know that. And that is why I kept my place and my distance until it became the business of the office of the Prime Minister. I did not come here today as a part of the Assembly or to get involved in the business of the Assembly. I came here today as leader of Trinidad and Tobago. And according to my oath of office, I am required to ensure that throughout Trinidad and Tobago there's good order and there's governance in place. And now, what exists in Tobago is an absence of a functioning Tobago House of Assembly, an executive that is the residue of the last body that went to the polls, which under law is the only body that is now conducting Tobago's business without a functioning oversight body, where the Assembly is in fact the local parliament of Tobago. It will be a dereliction of duty on my part if I sit at headquarters in Trinidad and watch Tobago's business proceeding without a functioning Assembly. It is against that background that, having said earlier on, if the Parliament was required, that the government will intervene, that I led the government to the Parliament and amended the House of Assembly Act to provide an opportunity for the Tobago citizenry to treat with the deadlock that existed. I am not hearing anybody saying that there is no deadlock. I'm not hearing anybody saying that there's an assembly in place that could continue, that could proceed to function. Because if there was an assembly in place, then the outgoing chief secretary would not have been there with a remnant of secretaries running their affairs. The reason why they are there is because there has been no assembly put in place, and of course I've seen or heard nothing to tell me that that was a likelihood in the very near future. So on that basis, a new option was put on the table. And that option was put there on the basis of the advice that I said I sought, senior counsel advice, as to what is doable in Tobago. And of course, there was all kind of interpretation by pontiffs as to what it meant and what the government was trying to do. And so one thing the government was aiming to do was to allow for the creation of a Tobago House of Assembly determined by the people of Tobago. It's the same people who voted in the 6-6 who would be called upon in any future elections to vote again. We have done nothing to add to Tobago's electorate, and we have done nothing to deny anybody a vote in Tobago. It's entirely up to the electorate. And of course, as we go forward in this way, I'm not surprised that there are other points of views, as there always will be. And I'm not surprised that there are challenges to legal opinions, as there always will be. But at the end of the day, we all have our responsibilities. I have even heard it said that the courts may be required to decide. Well, we have done nothing to block the way to the courthouse. But the question one has to ask is, in the interim of reasonable solutions that could be administered, what happens in Tobago? So this morning when I met with the people who have been sworn in, and present there were the 2 elected MPs as well. So the question that I asked, as per the agenda which I had sent to them, what is your intention? How do you proceed? How do you intend to proceed to have an assembly put in place, properly constituted, to function? That was the question that was put to them. And I dare say, notwithstanding a month of hurrah, there was really no answer. Because much of which was said, and some of it you know, some of it you yourself would have put out in the public domain, things about, casting straw, pulling straw, tossing coins, going back after 2 times failure, putting in place a council of elders, a caretaker government. All of these things were said as possibilities. But as long as those things were not anchored in provisions in the law, they were just so much wishful thinking on the part of individuals or persons who were guarding their own bailiwicks, or some people who were just outright mischievous and hateful. But those of us who have responsibility can't have those excursions into Never Never Land. Question, how do you intend to proceed? Because if you don't have an answer to that question, what exists now is what will continue for the next 4 years. And the law permits that. But as leader of the country, that is not what I would allow to continue. And that is why I have led my team in the parliament to amend the law. If there are people who have issues with that, they have expressed their views in the parliament and they were in the minority because the majority would have passed the law. And of course, if they are sufficiently aggrieved and so, they may go to the court and challenge what the government has done. And some people are even advocating that the court may tell the parliament what the parliament could do. Well, of course, that is their understanding. It is not ours. But of course, we may not be always right, and we will not be the first to have been proven wrong. So in that way, the conversation went. And when the first response came, it was a response from them that I was hoping that I would have had. And the response was that there's something that we could do, which has not yet been done. And that is that we could meet and we could talk and we could find a way to together come up with something that is pleasing to both sides. That had not happened before. We had an adjournment. I adjourned my meeting to allow the leadership on both sides to talk very briefly as to whether they are prepared to talk. That was a mile from where we were before. And they did agree that they are prepared to talk. And I did extract from them, I think, a commitment that they will come to a solution that would be influenced by the fact that it is better for them to fight over the completion of the Joint Select Committee and have its work come to the Parliament, and we have one election then, because the work of that Joint Select Committee, once it comes to the Parliament, will carry with it the amendment of certain laws, including the Constitution, and would trigger itself an election. So what we were facing here was an election which would have been brought about by the government's amendment of the existing act, if it is proclaimed, which will be in the same kind of time frame as the completion of the Joint Select Committee's work. And therefore, would you want to have 2 elections, one of which you might disagree with and the other one which you may not expect? So it makes more sense that we have some cooperation now in an interim where the teams will run Tobago's affairs in some kind of coming together. Whatever that would be, we'll find out in the next few days. And of course, they will all focus on the trust that the Parliament will intervene again, but on this occasion, to complete the Parliament's work of the almost completed work of the Joint Select Committee, which is meeting on the Tobago Amendment Bills. So that is what we have accomplished today, and that is what I think is as far as anybody could have expected the situation. So we now are in the hands of the 12 elected and sworn-in persons of the Tobago House of Assembly to so conclude their discussions and to come up with arrangements that will allow for the election and selection of persons to have a functioning Tobago House of Assembly in the shortest possible time. That arrangement in the understanding that it is interim to the time when we conclude the work of the Joint Select Committee, and that will put the people of Tobago back to the polls sometime during 2021. What we try and what I try to get them to understand, and they've agreed, that this gives us some element of certainty in a particular time frame for a particular purpose. And I think that the general sentiment of the elected Tobagonians is that they could work with that, and I am anxious to see what they come up with. And the group of them has the full support of the central government in handling this period of deadlock, which we are going to resolve in the way that has come up today, and we only have to wait to see exactly what they come up with, which would be their way. Of course, it's not the first time that people would have come together, and if in the discussions that they're going to have behind closed doors, if they come out saying that what has been offered by both sides is unpalatable, well, then we'll all be disappointed. But I have confidence that they would take on the responsibility of managing this period of transition as we transition to a larger objective of the completion of the work of the Joint Select Committee with respect to Tobago's improvement in the self-governance. So that is why I was here. That's what I was doing, and that is the outcome. So if you have any questions, I would take them now, and I trust that I'll be able to answer you satisfactorily. Just identify yourself first so I could learn who you are, because many of you, I don't want you all to believe that I have any special arrangement with Liz Williams.
Prime Minister, good afternoon. Whitfield Turner from I-95.5. Having heard what you just said, is it that we will no longer need the bill that would have been passed last night in the Senate?
No, the bill as passed opens a door which we can go through, or you may not go through that door, but it's a tool that has now become available as of last night. It has a proclamation clause, and that law doesn't come into effect until it is proclaimed. And if, for example, based on what I just said about the direction that the THA elected members representing Tobagonians, where they want to go, if for any reason that fails to deliver, then of course what we have done last night and what exists is always going to be available to be utilized by the government which I lead to ensure that Tobago has a functioning assembly.
Okay. Based on what the PDP just stated after meeting with you, their proposal is a sort of power sharing where the PNM would be able to get the presiding officer and chief secretary. They will have the positions of deputy chief secretary, secretary of finance, and you split the rest of the exec council equally between them. Is that something that you think is palatable and satisfactory?
Well, power sharing is a phrase that I never use because given my long involvement with public business, I never see it as power. It's administrative and it's service. So I never use the phrase power sharing. I was in this before in the 1818 at the level of the National Parliament when the Manning government was in office and the Panley UNC was on the outside as opposition and they were advocating for this power sharing. I have no power to share with anybody. What I think it is an agreement to share the administrative responsibilities. And if you see it that way, then that's what it is. What exactly the details will be, I will await the outcome of their firm conclusions. These, the points you raised there about possibilities, these are objectives that they could work towards, and I encourage them to do so. And I anticipate that some of that may form part of the outcome. But I prefer to await the outcome of it, and I am not here recommending to them anything. I did not stand in front of them as any as one of my colleagues in Tobago put it in his offerings to the media, as any colonial master, I was very careful not to make those kinds of suggestions to them and to let them accept responsibility for their own adjudication.
I know you spoke about the timelines earlier, but was there any way that this meeting, where you bring everybody together to meet and talk, was there any possibility of this taking place before any amendments went to Parliament?
Well, I don't know, Whitfield, but I suspect that you have the same upbringing that I have. My grandmother always taught me, nothing happens before its time. And as I said to them this morning, some of them who were in the media saying that this meeting should have taken place before, I accept the advice as to how to do my work and how to run my organizations. But had I come here before, you and them would have been the same people who would have been saying to me, get out of our affairs, get out of our business. This is not a matter for the Prime Minister. We are here setting in place the assembly which we were elected into, and there's no role there for you. And that is why I had said at the earliest that I will watch and see and hope that they could handle it and come up with a solution. After a month, I would have come to the conclusion that the situation in Tobago does not have an immediate solution and is not likely to change. That is when I allowed the office that I hold to get involved. Because if anybody says to me now, get out of Tobago's business, I could reply by saying the business of failure in Tobago to put in place a House of Assembly is a business of the Office of Prime Minister. Okay?
Carisia Douglas, TTT News.
Sorry, I didn't get the first one.
Carisia Douglas, TTT News.
Carnesia.
Carisia.
Carnesia.
C-A-R-I-C-I-A.
Carnesia.
Carisia, C.
A T.
C. Carisia Douglas.
A C. C.
Yes, C.
Carnesia. Okay, good. We got it. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Sorry about that.
Yes, I know you highlighted that you are leaving it up to the Assemblymen to iron out their administrative arrangements. But how soon do you hope that they will meet and really finalize what is the way forward in the interim?
Well, these things sometimes take a little time. Sometimes they take a long time. I'm sure you would have seen or heard on the news in other governmental situations where people set out to do this. And sometimes they could come to a conclusion very quickly. Other times it could take a little more time. I anticipate that in some reasonable time frame, especially since we've already had a month of no movement, that they would be able to come to a position of firmness, firm up some arrangement. And that is the undertaking that I was given. So I don't want to, there is no date put on it, but I would say that I think everybody understands that this ought to be dealt with in a certain amount of earnestness and with dispatch. So very soon I think I've heard detailed suggestions as to how it could be. And if they are already there, it should be relatively simple to close the positions.
Liz Williams, TV6 News. Mr. Prime Minister, welcome to Tobago. What we wanted to find out from you is, are you disappointed that you had to come all the way from Trinidad to get two political parties to meet, to agree, to form some sort of resolution?
Not at all. In this business of politics and national management, one cannot behave as though there's a formula where 2 + 2 always equals 4. In the business of managing the political issues and the national issues that are going to flow from that, sometimes things happen and they call for patience, they call for firmness, they call for compassion. All of these are sentiments that come to play. So I am not, as I said from day one, if it is that my office was required to play a role, it will play that role. If it is that the responsibility comes to the office to play that role, it will play that role. And if it is that it was to play the role 2 weeks after, a month after, and certainly not only 6 months after, we do it as quickly as possible, and this was the first opportunity that I've had within the understanding of what was happening to come, and I came here without reservation, and as I normally do, I spoke very frankly to them all, and I think they understand where I'm coming from and where the government is and where the interest of Tobago lies.
Just in another question with respect to COVID-19 and moving forward as a country, some persons are asking how soon, since the numbers are down but still trending, how soon will there be a reopening of the borders? Some persons, a tour operator contacted me and said they want to move forward with a hotel in Tobago, but this international partner is wondering how soon the borders will reopen.
The opening of borders was always very heavily influenced by the discovery and availability of a vaccine or vaccines. We are now at the stage where vaccine availability is reaching a point where we could think in terms of inoculating the populations that will be mixing. The United States, our main contact outside of Trinidad and Tobago, has indicated that initially they said by July, now they're saying that by May, their population should have vaccines and be sufficiently inoculated where people can mix without the fear of heavy or any infection at all. Once that happens, and also parallel to that, once we too and our other contact areas are sufficiently vaccinated, then the opening of borders will become a reality, because it would mean that populations that are protected by the vaccine to a sufficient level can now mix without any increased risk on the part of any other. So the population of Canada, you would have seen, if you follow the stories, the government of Canada is out front getting as much vaccines as they could to be able to inoculate the Canadian population. So then if we are inoculated, then it would be easy for us to mix. And of course the Americans, they too. And of course the British. So if you look at those three areas, Canada, the United States, and the UK, and of course our Caribbean neighbors, once we are sufficiently inoculated by the vaccines that are becoming more and more available, then borders would necessarily be open, and we hope very quickly people will begin to interact in the way that we used to before. Because to interact before is to destroy the gains that we have made. We in Trinidad and Tobago have been fortunate to have kept our infection levels low. Our health system is not overrun. We have suffered severely at the economic level, but at least most people are healthy and alive. The last thing that we want to do here is to run ahead of ourselves, open the borders, get reinfected, and having to start over the process. You would see today in the United States, with all the millions of vaccines that the new government is pushing through that population, the big issue today is some states in their political pulling and tugging, some states are beginning to open up even before the level of vaccination has reached the level that the administration wants it to be. But that is their politics. Hopefully we don't end up like that here in Trinidad and Tobago. And vaccines are becoming more available. The coming on stream of the Johnson & Johnson single-shot vaccine is a good thing. And then you would have heard that Merck, which have not been able to come up with their own vaccine, they are putting their production systems into Johnson & Johnson's efforts. So Merck will be making the same vaccine that Johnson & Johnson would have discovered, and therefore we have two producing houses to add to AstraZeneca and the others, and therefore the availability of vaccine in the coming months will be such that we can get to the level of inoculation that will allow us to begin to open our borders.
Question before some of my other colleagues also speak. What came out of your meeting also with the former chief secretaries? I know that I saw Mr. London, Ho Choi Charles.
Yeah. I did meet with them after I met with the young people in the Tobago House of Assembly, the 12 people and the 2 MPs. And I was satisfied to report to them exactly what I just told you. And our discussion flowed from there. What exactly, because what I meant to talk to them about was the same question that I asked the others. How do you proceed from this position? Fortunately, I was not able to tell them that we are still stuck. I was able to tell them that the people who have been sworn in and who are the only ones in law who can make that decision have decided to come together and to put a framework in place to allow an assembly to be constituted. Having told them that, we then had a very interesting discussion on the next step, because remember there were 2 items on the agenda. If you had seen the letters of invitation, the first one was the deadlocked assembly, and the second one was the Joint Select Committee's work and the internal self-government. So having literally got over the deadlock arrangement by putting something in place to bring that to an end, the next issue that we discussed at length was the work that had been done. And not being a member of the committee, even if I was a member of the committee, I couldn't go into details of the committee work. But what I could have done as head of the government is we talk about how this could function in the parliament once a report comes to the parliament within the time frame that the parliament has set. As I speak to you now, when the parliament extended the life of the Joint Select Committee recently, it extended it until May of this year. And therefore the committee is expected to conclude its work. And we know that that is doable because from the committee's work program, there are only a few matters left for them to conclude and report to the House. And once they do that, it will then be in the hands of the members of the House. And of course, I happen to lead the government that has the majority in the House and the majority on the committee. So we had some long discussions about that. And of course, those former chief secretaries brought a perspective which only they could have brought because they were the midwives of what is before the parliament. And you would hear a lot of people talking about it, and you will hear a lot of others talking about it. Invariably, there will be people who have not read the documents, never followed the consultations, are not informed about it, but that doesn't hinder them from expressing their views in this country, or views that start off with, I don't know what.
Camille McKechnie, Guardian Media. I just wanted to ask you,
sorry, I didn't get the name.
Camille McKechnie.
Tobago Media?
Guardian Media.
Oh, Guardian, good.
Tobago Today. I just wanted to ask you, sir, whether or not you feel that the amendments in Parliament represent the 10,000 plus persons' views who voted for the PDP because the PDP was not consulted on the amendments, or if you just went based on the fact that there was consultation before.
Well, as I said, if you had followed these developments, you would have seen the minute the results were known, the first statements that came from the PDP was that they want to have nothing to do with the PNM and they will be agreeing with nothing involving the PNM. Those were the emotions. I had to wait until those emotions subside. And in terms of the country's affairs, consulting with the PDP when they were in that mode would not have got me any further than a rejection saying, get out of our business, right? But sometimes you have to let the porridge cool before you get it to your lip, right? So those who were calling for consultation with the PNM, I never heard them calling on the PDP to consult with the PNM. But remember, I am not in the House of Assembly business. I only come in as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And I only come in when Tobago was demonstrably unable to have a Tobago solution to its Tobago House of Assembly. And whether you like the PNM or not, you like me or not, it falls to the government not to allow that to remain as a permanent feature. And it's in that context, I was able to meet with them this morning, discuss the said issue. Unfortunately, the temperatures would have cooled, the statements would have been less acerbic, and there was no bombast. And I am not naive because I represent a political party, and so does the PDP leadership. So what they have agreed to do is to find common cause and to pull in one direction on a particular issue. And that issue is internal self-government for Tobago, where the PNM is as invested as everybody else.
Dr. Rowley, Corey Connolly, Newsday newspaper. We're trying to resolve a 6-6 deadlock. The PNM has moved from a situation of having 10 seats in the Assembly to now having 6. How do you see the performance of the PNM as political leader of the PNM? Do you see it as an indictment on the performance of the party over the past 4 years?
I just told the young people in the Tobago House of Assembly that this is not the business about losing what your grandfather left in a will for you. This is about offering yourself for office and being selected at this time or not being selected. That was a setback for the PNM. We had 10 seats, we lost 4 of them, so nobody would be happy with that. We came into the election to win because we are the only party in this country, win, lose, or draw, would have made our party available in every seat, in every election. And therefore, what happens to us in the Tobago House of Assembly is not a matter of life and death. And as far as Tobago is concerned, you may recall that we in the PNM went into the Tobago House of Assembly, I think it's 3 times, with 1 seat. And that did not affect our commitment to the people of Tobago, because there came a night and we came in with 12 seats. So those who view the PNM's demise in Tobago in the context of 6 seats, that is 6 more than many others have. There's a party in the parliament with 19 seats. How many do they have in Tobago? But they have a lot to say in the parliament, behind closed doors on the safety of the parliament. But the PNM has 6 seats in Tobago. We had 1 seat in Tobago. We had some great experiences, you know. I myself, election night in Tobago, came within 360 votes of winning a parliamentary seat in Tobago in my first outing here. I was here in Tobago when we lost the Scarborough seat by 1 vote and did not call for a recount. I was here when we lost the Tobago County Council election, first THA election, we came in 8-4. So don't count us out. And all those who ascribe to us underhandness and whatever in terms of the solutions we put forward, they certainly don't understand the PNM. And the reason why we are able to take these things in stride, win, lose, or draw, is because of our commitment to Trinidad and Tobago for long term and for all times. So we are not about forming a party to win an election to get a post. Right? We are about serving the people of Trinidad and Tobago every time, wherever they place us. But we happen to also say in that breath that we are the premier political party in the Caribbean with a history second to none. Yes.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Akinlabi Holder, Tobago Channel 5.
I didn't get the name.
Akinlabi Holder.
Akinlabi
Holder. Akinlabi.
How do you spell your surname?
My surname or my first name?
How do you spell your surname?
Surname Holder.
Holder?
Yes.
Holder, right.
Yes.
The muffling and the thing, I didn't hear Holder at all. Sorry.
Oh.
Thank you.
From the meeting you had with the 12 elected assemblymen, it seems as though both political parties already knew what needed to be done, but they didn't necessarily want to go in that direction. Because you said that they mentioned to you that there's one other option that can be pursued. What do you think tipped the scale for them or changed their minds towards moving in that direction when before now they didn't seem willing to do that?
Well, I don't know that I will conclude that they were not willing to do it. Maybe the opportunity did not present itself, because understand, these are 2 political parties that are evenly yoked in the outcome of an election. And not only here in Trinidad and Tobago, wherever this occurs, it is not the easiest thing to say, okay, since this is the result, let's do so and so. It usually has a period of extensive possibilities. And I don't know that there's only one option. Eh? There are lots of options, always lots of options. Because one of the options is to do nothing. And that option is what would result in the PNM remaining in office. So if one were to ascribe the worst to the PNM, you would think that we would say, let's do nothing and hold on to office. We're not about that. We are saying that we want a properly functioning assembly, which would reflect somehow the involvement of the last elections here in Tobago. And that's why we are doing this. And maybe that is why they have been so easily convinced that that is the objective.
Mr. PM, I don't want to extend the press conference. I mean, we've all been here for the entire day. But I just wanted to say and ask the question again. 10,000 plus persons voted for the PDP, but yet you had Parliament passing legislation to affect the 10,000 plus persons without consulting, without any form of consultation, to include their views as opposed to the views that were presented about 2016.
Because the view of the PDP was made public by the PDP. So I know exactly what the PDP said. What the PDP said was their position. Their position was, one, that you go and pull straws because what their interpretation of the law was, and they had their supporters in the UNC saying that the law is written there in the standing orders, that they should go and use the parliamentary standing orders. That was their position. So I don't know that any consulting on my part at that time to them would have been received in any way other than with rejection and bombast. They expressed their position that the clerk, as a matter of fact, they sent a pre-action protocol to the clerk of the House saying that the clerk was acting illegally by not moving to what they were advised to do by the UNC, which is to go and pull straws. We rejected that position based on our legal advice. So I don't know what I was to consult them about. But what I do know, if they found themselves in difficulty, like the others in the Assembly, or the sworn-in members of the Assembly, then they could talk to the government, and the government had indicated up front, if you do find yourself in that situation, then the government, through the cabinet and the parliament, would be on standby to assist. So those who are advising that I should have gone and talked to the PDP, I would like to ask them to find out what they had already expressed, what their position was, what their pre-action protocol to the clerk was. Because if you express your position publicly, I know your position, you've expressed it. Right? Today, in a different environment, they have come to a different position. And that is okay. That is normal. And out of it, we hope will come a practical working of the situation. And no amount of hankering about what should have been and what shouldn't have been. As a matter of fact, in talking to the elders, one of them said to me that I should have talked to them before. Okay, I would have loved to talk to them before. But what drove the conversation is this deadlock that we had not catered for at this time. And of course, you know, hindsight is very useful. Had I come to Tobago and call a meeting, especially one to say, let's not have the election because the Joint Select Committee is about to report. You tell me, you of the media corps, what you would have written if a PNM asking for a sixth term had decided to say to any political party or anybody in Tobago, let us postpone the election and wait until the Joint Select Committee reports later in the year. What would have been your headline? Yes.
Gail Thomas, Radio Tambourine. I think, Dr. Rowley, that the
No, start over, please. You hid the name.
Gail.
Gail.
Thomas.
Say name?
From Thomas.
Thomas.
Yes.
From Miss Noel?
No.
Good. Not Gail, not a Miss Noel Thomas. Right, good.
Right, so I think the public were also looking forward to having the
I'm not
Assemblymen.
You're coming across muffled, I'm not really here.
They were also looking forward, I think, to having the Assemblymen here at the press conference to saying, well, what they would have agreed to.
I didn't get the question. I think you may have to take the mask down.
Right, so I'm saying that I think the public were also looking forward to seeing the Assemblymen here at the press conference.
At my press conference?
To
I don't know that. You did a poll and came up with that? No. This is my press conference. I agreed to meet the media after my outing with the Tobago people. So there's no rule or any formula as to what the public will expect here. I am here talking to the media, talking to the public, and of course, I'm sure that there will be other access by the PLM group here and the PDP group and so on, and they'll all speak for themselves. I'm not here trying to speak for any of them. I simply report to you on my interaction with them and what seemed to have been agreed upon. I hope that we are interpreting it the same way that I interpret it, because that will be a little disappointing if it's different. But I think we were sufficiently engaged that whenever they have their press conference, they probably will be saying the same thing that I'm saying to you, and maybe more, because it is now in the ball is now in their court to put some flesh on the bones.
Just clarifying, so we know because the PDP spoke with the media after, we know that they would have proposed this Tobago government. If you can, is it that the PNM...
They propose what?
They call it a Tobago government, where there will be it will constitute both parties sharing responsibilities in the Executive Council. But in terms of what did the PNM Assemblymen propose, did they also propose this merge, for want of a better word?
What I do know is that the PNM leadership in Tobago, they have agreed to work with those proposals on their own, and it is for the two parties to come up to something. I don't want to get ahead of myself or get ahead of them and then have to be erasing off the board. I'd rather not put anything on the board until it is confirmed. But any government at the House of Assembly is the Tobago government. So this is not a new birth. So whatever they call it, what I did ask them to do is to have a functioning assembly. Because if there isn't one, then I don't wake up well in the morning, because peace of the country does not have an administration in place.
Dr. Rowley, just a question here. I know in Trinidad at a recent political meeting some time back, you stated on the political platform that in terms of moving forward, if the PNM loses the upcoming polls, that's all right. I don't want to misquote you, but in want of a better word, you stated that it's not a problem in terms of the decisions you are making if the PNM Tobago arm loses the upcoming polls. Are you still standing by that?
I don't think that you are paraphrasing me accurately, because I would never lead or be a part of the PNM team going into an election and telling the electorate it's all right if we lose. I do no such thing. I've been in too many elections to do that. What I said is that we have no fear of defeat. And I could print that outside Balize House. We who have been successful more than any other political party, we start off in every election, in every seat, fighting to win. But we have no fear of defeat. It is those who are ephemeral who are afraid of defeat. We revel in our successes, we're proud of our organization, we're proud of our effort, and we expect to do well in every election. And in Tobago, we expect to win, especially since we are the incumbents, right? Because we have won 5 elections in a row here in Tobago. As a matter of fact, one of the difficulties that we are having here now in any election in Tobago is people saying that time for a change, just so. You know, change to what? Sometimes they can't even tell you, but they just had enough of the same administration for 5 terms. I mean, if you organize your life like that, like some people do, the outcome usually are not always enjoyable. You know, you could imagine me saying that. But we didn't say if we lose is all right. Losing is traumatic, and some people can't even cope with it. What we have shown in the PNM is the resilience to cope with victory and defeat. And of course, we will always be available to the electorate in Tobago, as we have been since the THA was formed in 1980. And before that, it was the Tobago County Council that we... You know, and it's interesting, you know, to see people say sometimes the PNM has done nothing for Tobago. Usually that comment is associated by people who have not paid any attention to decades of development in their own lives, and to see how those developments were influenced by the developments in Tobago and in Trinidad and Tobago. But that's all par for the course in the political arena. I have no doubt that when I would have left this podium or left this office, that there will be people saying that my presence was a waste of time or I did nothing in Trinidad and Tobago, but that would not be borne out by the facts. Yes, Winfield.
Yes. Going back to the pandemic briefly, with a 7-day rolling average now of 5 and an active caseload now into double figures, how likely is the country to see a further rolling back of the measures to prevent the spread of the virus?
Well, as I said before Christmas, when we were anxiously anticipating what was likely to happen over Christmas into New Year's, that if we manage to hold our position pre-Christmas, that we will make the giant step forward of bringing some of our children out to school. And of course, you would have seen that happening, and it has been going on relatively smoothly. And you also would have seen that we've opened up sporting activities to a certain level. And the answer is that as we get those results, we take a little more risk going further and further forward. Because today in Trinidad and Tobago, we have 2 areas of abnormality. One is the closed border, which we are bringing people over the border in a managed way. And you would have seen and heard a lot of griping over that in some quarters. And the other one was keeping children home from school for almost a year, which we are now being allowed to do, make them some changes. The other things, there have been minor adjustments there, and of course, we have spent a lot of money preserving life and livelihood. The one thing that has happened much to our satisfaction is that our health system had never been overwhelmed by the coming of the virus, and that we have never been in a position not to be able to provide health care to those who would have required it as a result of infection from the virus. That is the yardstick that we have been using. It is not to say that it can't happen. You only have to look at other people's circumstances to see how quickly they would have moved from a position of comfort to a position of close to disaster. So we keep saying the things that have worked for us, we've got to keep on doing those things, and it gives us the opportunity to do more of the things that we had not been doing because of our withdrawal from the virus. So in the coming weeks ahead, we expect to launch our vaccination program. I have had information which I have not shared publicly because I have been provided that information from quarters in a confidential way. So I, as leader of the country, I knew a little bit more. As I always say, in my position as Prime Minister and head of the National Security Council, I happen to know a little bit more than the average citizen. And very soon, we expect to receive quite an allocation of vaccines. And because we are in the position that we are in, which is a fairly good position, I mean, we ranked we ranked number 4 in the world in terms of our numbers in managing the virus. And of course, I mean, if you look ahead of us, you could even ask some questions about who is ahead of us. But the bottom line is, we are well on track to having the vaccines that we have signed on to, have paid for, which are authorized, but there are some strictures. One stricture was, as Prime Minister, I said to you earlier on, this government will not allow any vaccine that is not approved by the WHO to be used on the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That is a policy position that has other consequences, and those consequences are, if we do get vaccines that are not approved, we will not use it. We will not pay for vaccines that are not approved. And of course, there's one CARICOM country which has approved the use of Russian and Chinese vaccines that are not approved by WHO. And of course, some people might say, well, they are a proactive government and they are taking steps to have their population inoculated. But let me ask you all something. Suppose, as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I allow the Ministry of Health to allow into this country and to use upon you and your family a vaccine that is not approved by WHO, and that vaccine turn out to be damaging or dangerous. What will be the position of the government of Trinidad and Tobago? What is the liability? And what would be your personal position if you are the citizen who is damaged by that vaccine? So old talk is cheap. But looking after the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that is my job. And as long as I'm in this position, as my grandfather would have told me, if it is for one day, be in charge. Well, I trust that you have heard as much as you wanted to hear from me today, and I want to thank you all very much for continuing, and we all anxiously await the outcome of the talks between the elected people here in Tobago. I hope that they come up very quickly with a working response, and that we have an assembly that is functioning very soon, and I look forward to coming back here very soon to the installation or the inauguration of the next assembly in Tobago. Thank you all very much.